Thank you very much, Dr. Anil Kumar Rai sir, for giving me this opportunity. Uh, I thank all the team of RT Forum for giving me this opportunity. And also, I am thankful to my co-panelists, Professor Rao and Professor Pradhan and Professor Bhattacharjee, and all the people attending from different parts of the country, who some of them who have sacrificed their even lunch to participate in this webinar. Thank you so much for all of you for your valuable time. As Professor Srinivas Rao has rightly said the agenda, I wish to talk about some of the conceptual debates with reference to Right to Education Act from the perspective of the social history of India, especially by taking the active role of the civil society from colonial India to the contemporary times. So the government of Maharashtra on 7 November 2007 declared November 7 as the school entry day for all the children of Maharashtra. Just I was curious to know why Maharashtra government has declared, let's say, November 7th as an important day. Because this marks the entry or admission of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar into the school, especially in 1900, November 1900, let's say on 11th, on September 7th. So after 117 years, this act of government of Maharashtra primarily gives us an opportunity to revisit what is the meaning of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and also Mahatma Jyotirao Phule and also Savitri Phule for the contemporary India. As the organizers have rightly, let's say, titled the panel as inclusive and equitable education, and challenges, especially with reference to the Dalits and other marginal sections of the society, we need to revisit what were the important, what was important discourses which were primarily developed by the civil society activists of the colonial times when India was under the control of the colonial empire. I think this is where my interest goes towards the idea of what is the role and relevance of Mahatma Phule and Savitri Phule and also Fatima Sheikh. These are some of the great people and great visionaries of India who had a different vision. I think this is where I wish to quote the writings of one of the leading sociologists of education by name Suma Chitnis, where she primarily argues that in pre-colonial India, the education was primarily limited to only the Savarna section of the society. Even among Savarnas, only the Brahmin boys were entitled for education. That's how the history of education primarily goes in pre-colonial India. So whatever the colonial, let's say, the policies, as Krishna Kumar also, let's say, invokes the idea that we can't simply blame the colonial state that they have introduced education only to meet the company demands, and also it has served the multi demands of Indian nationalists. That's how Krishna Kumar conceptualized the idea of education. But the point is that if you look at the latent functions of the colonial policies with reference to education, it is the colonial policies which are primarily responsible for introducing people like Jyotirao Phule, because he was the first person to educate him to get education, especially in an English medium school, which primarily changed the nature and discourse of the educational movement back to 1850. I think that's where we need to understand the struggles of Jyotirao Phule and followed by the struggles of people like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was subjected to multiple forms of humiliations, multiple forms of discrimination, and multiple issues with reference to the spatial exclusion within the school space, within the classroom. He was not allowed to sit within the classroom. That's where the whole question of why Ambedkar and his idea of education and his experience with education is also very much relevant even in the contemporary India. So, but despite of, let's say, the multiple forms of exclusion witnessed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar within the classrooms and within the school premises, right? As just now morning I was reading one news, when there was no pune, there was no water to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So that was the condition in which Dr. B.R. Ambedkar got education in during the colonial India. But let us see what was happening after his schooling. So this is where we need to understand that on the one hand, the colonial state was introducing some policies. On the other hand, the Indian national leaders were also demanding for different types of different vision of education. I think that's where we need to invoke the important reflections or important contributions of people like Gopalakrishna Gokhale way back to 1910. He made a systematic attempt he demanded the colonial state to implement the Right to Education Act. I think that whole the history of 100 years of the Right to Education Act of 2010 need to be conceptualized from the colonial times. I think that's where his demand for education for all, especially the children up to 14 years, gained a lot of, let's say, momentum. And though the British state did not accept that kind of demand of Gopalakrishna Gokhale, but it has created some kind of interest among the marginal sections of the society, especially who were not allowed to study. This kind of groups started taking interest. I think that's where we need to understand the role of the Christian missionaries, the role of Arya Samaj, the role of Brahma Samaj, and role of the Raja Ram Mohan Rai, and from people from different parts of India, including people like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and several other people made a systematic attempt. I think my point here is that I want to highlight the role of the civil society. So the civil society was one of the backbone when the state was not at all interested to initiate any progressive measures towards universalization of education. Forget about universalization of education, even the wider expansion of education. That was the time in which the civil society has taken keen interest to promote the importance of education among the diverse sections of the society. So, but what, as all of you know, that to cut the story short, even the Wardha Declaration, once again under the leadership of Zakir Hussain, they also realized, they also envisaged a new vision for education with reference to the free India. But what has happened to free education in free India? This is one of the paradoxical question. I think that's where, as a student of sociology, as a student of, let's say, social sciences, I wish to take your attention to the constitutional debates. When you're referring to the constitutional debates, the members of the constitution were primarily divided into two groups. On the one hand, one group of people were primarily demanding for right to education to all the children in the free India. On the other hand, the regressive leaders of the then Indian National Congress Party, who are ruling the India in post 1947, they were not interested to implement or accept the demand forwarded by a progressive leadership under the leadership of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I think that's where the paradoxes of the state is very much evident after the Indian independence. So that's where the point is done. Though in the pre-independent era, the most of the Indian national leaders were very much keen to promote the education for all. But the moment got independence, the feudal forces of the Congress Party were not interested to expand the idea of education to all the sections of the society. So that's where, friends, we need to understand how the Right to Education Act, which was primarily conceptualized by the civil society organizations, starting from the leadership of Jyotiba Phule to under the leadership of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, was primarily defeated. That's one of the reasons why we ultimately, the education was not declared as a fundamental right, but rather it was primarily kept as a part of as a part of the direct to principles of state policies. So that's where, friends, from 1950s to almost 2010, October 2010, the people of India, or in that manner, I wish to say that the people, especially the marginal sections of the society, who are not exposed to the idea of education for thousands of years. Once again, they had to wait for almost 60 years, even after independent India. So, thanks to the UPA government, back to 2009, and because of the active role of the civil society organizations and the progressive forces within the government, which ultimately led to the formulation of education as a fundamental right. But as Professor Srinivas Rao has rightly mentioned, there are a number of structural limitations within the Right to Education Act. On the one hand, it talks about education for all, the free and compulsory education for all. But on the other hand, it talks about the 25% reservations in private school to the marginal sections of the society. So this 25% of reservation in private school is primarily is nothing but accepting the poor quality of education within the government educational institutions and this unwillingness of the state to promote the quality education within the government educational institutions. I think that's where once again one can see the structural limitations within the policy making itself. So the point is that there are a number of government programs which have already proved that the government can create a historical change. So that's what we have learned from the experiences of Navodaya schools. That's what we have learned from the experience of Andhra Pradesh Andhra Pradesh residential schools, and also the Andhra Pradesh social welfare residential schools. These were the schools which have already proved that the government can do the miracles. But unfortunately here, the government itself was not at all willing to take the ownership. I think that's where we need to understand we need to understand and we need to doubt the role of the state. What is the ultimate goal of the state? Whether the state is committed to the educational, the free and compulsory education, whether the state is committed to the quality education, is one of the important question which need to be explored. So, given this kind of experiences, here I wish to focus more on the question of let's say equity from the access, because as our previous speaker Professor Rao has rightly mentioned about the number of issues and challenges with reference to the question of inclusion and exclusion. But my point here is that although the government of India, through the diverse programs starting from, let's say, the Kothari Commission to the 1986 National Education Commission, and once again the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, the number of programs at one level or other has primarily led to the wider participation or the universalization of education, at least at the primary level. But on the other hand, yes, Professor Rao rightly mentioned that the state was not willing to open the education, especially at the secondary level, to the largest sections of the society. So we need to, when you're talking about the high levels of dropout levels or dropout rate, who are the children who are dropping out from the schools? Yes, the Right to Education Forum, you are the right people. And also we have a number of, let's say, academics here. We are sitting, as all of us know that there are a number of factors which primarily comes from the socio-economic and cultural and religious background of the communities, which primarily plays an important role. But unfortunately, the state, in the name of rationalization of the school, is very much showing a lot of interest in closing down number of primary schools. But friends, we need to understand one important point, that if the state closes, let's say, one or two schools in a village where there are 5 schools, let's say, at least it makes some sense. But if state closes a school which is located in one of the tribal hamlet or in one of the villages where there is one and only school, we are depriving the access to education itself. Because I have conducted almost 4 studies on primary education, on secondary education with reference to the Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, and I was shocked to see that most of the tribal hamlets, even today, are deprived of, forget about even high school, even the primary schools. So, given this kind of experiences, we need to retain the primary school despite of lesser number of children, and at the same time, when the state is going for rationalization of the school in the villages where there are more than 2 or 3 primary schools, the state should come up with the secondary education. The state should come up with high school, because lack of high school is one of the primary reasons for higher levels of dropouts. Who are these dropouts? If you go in detail, most of the girls, especially from the lower castes, especially the girls from the Dalit background, the girls from the backward classes, and the girls from the Muslims, these are the girls, because of the socio-religious, cultural and economic reasons, they were not in a position to complete even their high school. So therefore, the state has to take a proactive role in this particular, let's say, matter. But unfortunately, when I read the National Education Policy, which is the latest education document of 2020, the policy is also very much silent on the question of the diversity among the marginal sections of the society. It primarily invoked a new conceptual category called the socially, economically disadvantaged groups. But we are talking about the social and economic disadvantaged group. It doesn't convey the multiple pluralities. The multiple pluralities primarily comes from the idea of the Adivasis, primarily comes from the idea of the Muslim minorities. It primarily comes from the people from the isolated regions. So, unfortunately, the state is not willing to accept this sociological diversity, which is nothing but compromising, which is nothing but negating the multiple pluralities of the Indian diversity. So, therefore, as a right to education forum, we need to celebrate, or we need to understand the role of sociological diversity in widening the educational participation. Because the children now, let's say Muslim minority children, they are willing to learn, they are willing to go for primary education and secondary education along with learning Arabic language. So because of the, let's say, religious reasons. So the point is that that's where the state need to take a proactive role in initiating the policies. So that's where, friends, my argument here is that the latest education document has not given adequate importance to the sociological diversity. Another important point I would like to highlight with reference to National Education Policy document, it is that on the one hand it talks about the problems of
Professor Nagaraju.
Sir.
Professor Nagaraju.
I will wish to take 2 minutes and complete. I wish to take 2 minutes and complete. Yeah?
Okay.
Another point is that the state on the one hand talks about the problems of privatization of education, but at the same time the policy document clearly talks about encouraging the private participation in educational promotion. This is also very much contradictory in nature. So I wish to argue that the state is primarily working with the different contradictions, which ultimately going to work negatively on the educational participation of the Dalits and other marginal sections of the society. And I wish to make one point and then stop. And also we are talking about the pandemic, the impact of pandemic on the education of the marginal groups. I wish to invoke one of the famous French sociologists by name famous French sociologist by name Pierre Bourdieu, who primarily normally talks about the different forms of capital. So one of the forms of capital, according to him, is the cultural capital, which talks about access to technology. But unfortunately here, most of the children who belong to the marginal strata, they were deprived of access to technologies such as computers and also the smartphones. And those who have, let us say, access to the smartphones or computers, and those parents, they were not in a position to, let's say, handle this kind of technologies. So the point is that ultimately there is a digital divide even in the present day context. So I would like to I just make one important observation then submit. I wish to argue by saying that the constitutional provisions have led to vital participation of the children from the marginal sections of the society, even at least at the primary education. But at the empirical level, there is a highest form of discrimination. So I wish to invoke Professor Gopal Guru by saying that there is a liberating education and a retaining experience. Liberating education and retaining experience. So that means, on the one hand, we are going for democratization of education, but without democratization of schooling, which is a very, very prerequisite for realizing the fruits of education. So once again, I am very much thankful to the forum for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
धन्यवाद। प्रोफेसर नागाराजू गुंडेमाड़ा अभी बोल रहे थे। उन्होंने भारत के सामाजिक इतिहास के दृष्टि से शिक्षा के अधिकार का विवेचन किया है और जो हमारी सामाजिक राजनीतिक संरचना है उसमें वही परिणाम होगा जो परिणाम हम झेल रहे हैं, जो परिणाम हमारे दलितों और वंचितों के बच्चे झेल रहे हैं। यह पूरी व्यवस्था उन 15% लोगों के बच्चों को पढ़ाने के लिए है, जो 15% यदि ठीक से पढ़ जाते हैं तो सरकार और प्राइवेट कि पब्लिक और प्राइवेट दोनों सेक्टर के काम निकल जाएंगे और बाकी के लिए उसी तरह 2 रुपए 3 रुपए किलो जिस तरह अनाज बंटता है उसी तरह 2 रुपए 3 रुपए किलो अनाज की तरह यह स्कूल और यह शिक्षा चलती रहेगी। हम लोग उसमें गुणवत्ता की चर्चा, अधिकार की चर्चा करते रहेंगे। धन्यवाद प्रोफेसर नागाराजू गुंडेमाड़ा।